For many people, power and companionship are expected to go hand in hand. The assumption is simple. A person who spends decades in public life must surely share that life with someone behind the scenes. Yet the story of Lindsey Graham challenges that assumption in surprising ways. For more than 30 years, Graham has been a constant presence in American politics, navigating intense debates, shifting alliances, and national controversies. Cameras follow his public statements, analysts study his decisions, and critics dissect his strategies. But when attention shifts away from policy and toward his personal life, something unusual appears: silence. Unlike many political figures whose families often become part of their public identity, Graham's private world has remained notably quiet. He has never been married and rarely discusses romantic relationships. Over time, that absence has created curiosity. When people ask where Lindsey Graham lives, they are often asking something deeper. Who shares his life when the cameras turn off? The answer is less dramatic than rumors suggest, yet it reveals a complex portrait of a man whose life has been shaped by duty, personal loss, and an unwavering focus on work. Understanding that story requires looking not only at politics, but at the quieter moments behind it. Away from Washington's political drama, Graham's primary home sits in the small town of Seneca. Unlike the grand estates often associated with powerful public figures, his residence is surprisingly modest. The single-story ranch-style house was built in the late 1980s and has long been described as simple and practical rather than luxurious. Valued at a little over $200,000, it reflects a lifestyle that avoids spectacle. There are no towering gates, elaborate landscaping, or architectural statements meant to impress visitors. Instead, the property blends into the quiet rhythm of a small southern community. Inside, the home follows a straightforward layout with open living areas and functional spaces designed for everyday routines rather than display. It is the kind of place where comfort matters more than appearance. For someone who spends much of the year in the demanding environment of national politics, the house functions more like a retreat than a symbol of status. Observers who expect dramatic signs of wealth or secrecy often find the opposite. The simplicity itself becomes the most notable feature, reinforcing the sense that Graham prefers privacy and familiarity over the attention that often accompanies political success. The design of the house mirrors a broader pattern in Graham's life: practicality over performance. The living spaces are open and connected, creating a natural flow between rooms without unnecessary divisions. Bedrooms are modest, and the decor is restrained. There are no elaborate displays or extravagant additions that suggest a home designed to entertain large social circles. Instead, the environment appears quiet and personal, suited to someone who values routine after long periods of travel and political engagement. Over the years, journalists and observers have occasionally speculated about who might share the space with him. Yet public records have never shown co-ownership of the property or evidence of a long-term cohabiting partner. There have been no significant renovations, suggesting expansion for a growing household. The home has remained essentially the same for decades. In that sense, the house offers a subtle insight into Graham's lifestyle. It serves as a place of rest rather than a social hub. For a figure constantly surrounded by colleagues, reporters, and political rivals, returning to a quiet and predictable environment may provide balance. The house does not answer every question about his private life, but it does reflect a deliberate preference for simplicity. Long before he became a national political figure, Graham's early adulthood unfolded in a very different environment. In his 20s, he served in the United States Air Force as part of the Judge Advocate General's Corps. During that time, he spent several years stationed in Germany. Those years proved important not only for his professional development, but also for his personal life. Living abroad often creates a unique social environment where colleagues rely heavily on one another for companionship and support. Within that close-knit community, Graham formed friendships and relationships that were more personal than anything later seen during his political career. It was during this period that he experienced the closest approach to building a shared domestic life. These relationships, however, existed within the temporary and demanding structure of military service. Assignments, relocations, and career decisions constantly reshaped personal plans. What might have developed into long-term commitments instead remained shaped by circumstances. For Graham, those early experiences offered glimpses of what a different life might have looked like. Yet the same sense of responsibility that guided his professional choices also influenced how those relationships evolved, eventually steering him back toward the path that would define his future in law and politics. One of Graham's earliest serious relationships developed with a fellow attorney serving in the same military legal division. He once referred to her publicly only as Carol. Their connection grew from shared routines and the intense work environment common among military legal officers. Both were navigating the challenges of military law, long working hours, and the unique pressures that come with serving abroad. In many ways, the relationship reflected the natural closeness that can form between colleagues facing similar responsibilities. Yet even then, Graham maintained a certain level of emotional distance. Friends from that period have described him as focused and disciplined, someone who approached life with careful boundaries. The relationship with Carol did not end in dramatic conflict or public controversy. Instead, it gradually faded as professional commitments began pulling them in different directions. Such endings are common among young professionals whose careers demand constant relocation and attention. For Graham, the experience seemed to reinforce the idea that timing and circumstance often shape relationships as much as personal feelings do. While the connection was meaningful, it never developed into the kind of lasting partnership that might have followed him into later stages of life. Another relationship during his years in Europe appeared to carry even greater potential. Graham dated an Austrian flight attendant named Sylvia who worked for Lufthansa. Unlike his earlier relationship with a colleague, Sylvia represented a life outside the structured world of military law. She traveled frequently, experienced different cultures, and lived within a profession that emphasized mobility and independence. Their relationship lasted close to a year, long enough for Graham to seriously consider the possibility of marriage. Friends later recalled that he spoke openly about the idea of building a future together, yet practical realities eventually complicated those plans. Sylvia had family responsibilities in Austria, particularly an elderly mother who depended on her presence. At the same time, Graham felt increasingly drawn back to the United States, where he planned to continue his legal career and eventually enter politics. The distance between those two futures became difficult to reconcile. Neither wanted to ask the other to abandon important responsibilities. In the end, the relationship concluded quietly. The decision reflected the complicated balance between personal aspirations and external obligations, a theme that would appear repeatedly throughout Graham's life. After returning to the United States, Graham's career began accelerating in ways that left little room for personal stability. He resumed legal work, maintained involvement with the military reserve, and gradually moved toward public office in South Carolina. Each step brought new responsibilities and tighter schedules. Political campaigns, fundraising events, and legislative duties filled the calendar with relentless demands. Relationships, by contrast, require time and emotional continuity. For someone building a career in public service, that consistency can be difficult to maintain. Graham has occasionally acknowledged this reality in interviews. He has suggested that his lifestyle made traditional relationships challenging, not because he rejected them, but because the timing rarely worked. By the time he established himself as a rising political figure, much of his daily routine was already structured around long-term professional commitments. The rhythm of campaign seasons, legislative sessions, and national debates replaced the slower pace that often allows personal relationships to grow. While many politicians manage to balance both worlds, Graham's path gradually tilted toward one side. Over time, work became not only his profession, but also the central structure around which the rest of his life was organized. As Graham's national profile grew, his bachelor status began attracting more public attention. In American politics, personal narratives often play an important role in shaping public perception. Many leaders introduce spouses and children as part of their political identity, creating a familiar image of family life. Graham's story did not fit that pattern. By the time he entered the United States Senate and later considered a presidential campaign, his long-term singleness had become a topic of frequent curiosity. Rather than avoiding the subject entirely, he occasionally addressed it with humor. In interviews and campaign appearances, he joked about his bachelor lifestyle, sometimes describing himself as someone fully available for the demands of public service. Yet behind the humor was a more reflective tone. Graham often explained that he had simply never found the right circumstances for marriage. The combination of military service, law, and political ambition had shaped his life in ways that left little space for traditional domestic commitments. His comments rarely sounded defensive. Instead, they conveyed a sense of acceptance about the direction his life had taken. Speculation about Graham's personal life has occasionally surfaced in media discussions and political commentary. Public figures who remain single for long periods often become subjects of curiosity, and Graham has been no exception. Over the years, rumors and assumptions have circulated, particularly during moments when his national visibility increased. Graham has consistently denied suggestions that he maintains a secret romantic life. He has emphasized that there is no hidden partner or undisclosed household arrangement. While speculation tends to persist in public discourse, the available evidence has never supported claims of a concealed relationship. What stands out instead is the consistency of his explanation. Graham repeatedly describes his life as shaped primarily by work, routine, and long-standing family connections rather than romantic partnership. Observers sometimes interpret that pattern differently depending on their expectations about leadership and personal fulfillment. But from Graham's perspective, the narrative has remained simple. His career demanded a level of commitment that left little opportunity for traditional domestic life. Whether one finds that explanation satisfying or not, it has remained unchanged throughout decades of public scrutiny. Understanding Graham's personal choices also requires looking further back into his early life. When he was only 22 years old, tragedy reshaped his responsibilities in ways few young adults experience. Both of his parents died within a short period, leaving his younger sister, Darlene, still in her early teens. Suddenly, Graham found himself stepping into the role of guardian while continuing his own education and military commitments. The transition was immediate and profound. Instead of focusing solely on career plans or personal ambitions, he became responsible for providing stability and guidance to his sister. He helped manage school arrangements, daily routines, and financial responsibilities. For someone barely out of college, the experience demanded maturity and resilience. Those years formed a defining chapter in Graham's life, strengthening his sense of duty toward family. Many observers later suggested that this early responsibility may have influenced his later priorities. When a person's formative years involve caring for family members rather than building romantic partnerships, it can shape how they view commitment and responsibility in adulthood. The bond between Graham and his sister has remained strong throughout his career. Even as his political influence expanded and his schedule grew more demanding, he often described family as one of the most stable aspects of his life. Darlene has spoken publicly about her brother's dedication during those difficult years after their parents' deaths. She has emphasized that he never treated the responsibility as temporary or optional. Instead, he approached it with the same seriousness that later defined his professional career. For Graham, family did not represent a secondary priority behind politics. It was an early obligation that shaped his identity. That experience may explain why he often frames his life choices around duty rather than personal comfort. In interviews, he has occasionally suggested that caring for his sister gave him a sense of purpose during a time when many young adults are still discovering their direction. The relationship between them illustrates a different kind of partnership, one based on loyalty, shared history, and mutual support rather than romance. During his brief presidential campaign, Graham even used humor to acknowledge this unique family dynamic. When asked who might serve as First Lady if he were elected, he jokingly suggested that his sister could take on the role. The comment drew laughter, but it also highlighted how central family remained in his life story. In American political culture, candidates often present polished images of traditional households. Graham's situation did not follow that script, and he seemed comfortable acknowledging the difference. His campaign focused primarily on national security and foreign policy rather than personal narratives. Yet moments like that remark about his sister revealed a quieter aspect of his personality. They suggested a man who understood the expectations surrounding political leadership, but also recognized that his life had taken a different path. Instead of attempting to reshape that narrative to fit conventional standards, he often addressed it openly, blending humor with honesty about the circumstances that shaped his personal world. The persistence of questions about Graham's private life reveals something broader about public expectations. In many societies, long-term singleness is often interpreted as unusual, particularly for individuals in positions of influence. Political leaders are frequently expected to embody familiar family roles that resonate with voters. When someone does not fit that model, curiosity naturally follows. Graham's situation illustrates how those expectations can influence public perception. Some people interpret his lifestyle as evidence of intense professional dedication. Others view it as a personal sacrifice made in pursuit of political goals. Still others remain curious about possibilities that have never been confirmed. Regardless of interpretation, the pattern of his life remains consistent. There are no public records indicating a shared household or long-term romantic partner living with him. Instead, his personal environment appears centered on routine, work, and long-standing family connections. That reality may seem unusual compared with the traditional narratives surrounding many public figures, but it also highlights the diversity of paths individuals take while building careers in public service. Seen from another perspective, Graham's home in Seneca becomes more than just a residence. It represents a quiet counterpoint to the intensity of national politics. In Washington, he participates in debates that shape international alliances, domestic policies, and major legislative decisions. The atmosphere is fast-paced, competitive, and often confrontational. Returning to a modest house in a small town provides a stark contrast to that environment. The simplicity of the setting may serve as a reminder of earlier stages in his life before national prominence. For many public figures, private homes become symbols of status or wealth. Graham's property, by comparison, communicates something different: continuity. It has remained largely unchanged as his political career evolved. That stability may help explain why he has kept it for so long. In a profession defined by shifting alliances and constant public scrutiny, having a familiar place to return to can offer a sense of grounding. Ultimately, the story of Lindsey Graham's personal life is less about secrecy and more about the ways duty and circumstance shape human choices. His experiences, from early family loss to military service and decades in politics, created a life structured around responsibility. Romantic relationships appeared along the way, particularly during his years abroad, but none developed into the long-term partnership many people assume must exist behind the scenes. Instead, Graham's closest commitments have often centered on family and public service. His quiet home in Seneca reflects that reality. It is not a place surrounded by dramatic mysteries or hidden narratives. Rather, it stands as a simple reminder that some lives evolve according to priorities very different from what the public expects. For viewers trying to understand the person behind the political figure, that perspective may be the most revealing. The story is not about a hidden partner. It is about how a life devoted to duty can shape personal paths in ways that remain both visible and widely misunderstood.